Before we learn how to solve simple trigonometric equations, I just want to do a quick review with you of what we learned so far. So if you remember, when we add the trigonometric circle, and we were taking, for example, an angle that was here, this one was pi over 6, so the angle here is pi over 6. We could find the coordinate at that point, and if you remember the coordinate, if you look, the y value is 1/2, and the x value, if you do your x squared plus y squared is equal to 1, is square root of 3 over 2. So we have the two coordinates for our angle pi over 6. So if, for example, I was asking you for sine of pi over 6, then sine is always opposite over hypotenuse. So in this case, the hypotenuse is always 1, so opposite is 1/2. And so if you remember in the coordinate, the second coordinate was always sine of our angle, and the first one here was always cosine of our angle. So now that you know that sine of pi over 6 is 1/2, 1/2 here, this corresponds to the y value when the angle is pi over 6. So this is the y value when angle is pi over 6, and the angle is in rad. So if I'm asking you to solve this simple equation, if I'm telling you that sine of theta is 1/2, what do you have to do? You have to go in your trig circle and you have to check when is the y value equal to 1/2. So when is the y value equal to 1/2? It would be here. So you have to figure out what are the two angles that are here. So there is one here that is pi over 6, and the other one is here, which is the same as taking pi minus pi over 6, which is 5 pi over 6. So when you have this, it gives you two answers. Your angle can be pi over 6, or your angle can be 5 pi over 6. If you remember before, when you add to find the theta here, you would use your calculator and you would do sine -1 of 1/2. But if you do that, it's going to give you a number that's not as precise as these ones. So that's why you need to use your trigonometric circle to solve the simple equations. So let's practice a little bit. So what does it mean to solve? It means to find the angle for which either the x or the y coordinate is given. And even if it's tangent, and it's going to be y over x. So let's look at the first one. If I'm asking you when is sine x equal to square root of 2 over 2, so you have to think about your trigonometric circle. Square root of 2 over 2 is the one that is here. If you remember, the coordinate here is square root of 2 over 2, and then square root of 2 over 2 here. So the sine is the y coordinate. So if you remember, there's one here, and there's also another one right here. So the first one, we know x is going to be equal to pi over 4, or if you remember, when we count in pi over 4, this is 1 pi over 4, 2 pi over 4, 3 pi over 4. And if you continue, this would be 4 pi over 4, which is equal to pi, right? So we're looking for this one here. So your second one would be 3 pi over 4. Let's look at cosine x is square root of 3 over 2. Sorry, there was a mistake. It was supposed to be minus square root of 3 over 2. So if you think about your trigonometric circle, where is minus square root of 3 over 2? If you look at your trig circle, it's around here. If you can use your calculator to calculate what is square root of 3 over 2. If you type it on your calculator, you should get minus 0.87. So you can see that, remember, this here is 1, negative 1. So minus square root, minus 0.87 is around here. So if you remember what is your angle here, you can remember that we could divide it in 6 equal parts. And so that would be, this first one is pi over 6. So 2 pi over 6, 3, 4, 5. So meaning your x has to be 5 pi over 6. Or if you keep going, 6 pi over 6, and this one here would be, or x is equal to 7 pi over 6. Now I can hear you telling me, well, this is easy because these points are the ones that we know, but what if it's a point that we don't know, right? So what if you have to solve for sine of x is equal to 1/3? So again, you start by doing your trig circle. Sine is your y value, and remember the top here, this is 1, so 1/3 is maybe here, right? So when is your sine equal to 1/3? So you can see that your first angle is this one. This is your first angle. And the second one will be pi minus this first angle. So when you find your two solutions, you're going to have x is equal to sine negative 1 of 1/3. Or your second angle will be pi minus sine negative 1 of 1/3. So you're always going to find your two solutions like that. If you look at the graph, it's really helping you to visualize what are the two values. So for this one, we cannot really find the precise answer. Well, actually, the precise answer is this. This is the precise answer. But if you want, I know usually you like to find an approximate value. So the first one would be 0.339 and so on. So if you remember, that means it's less than 1 rad, because you remember when we did 1 rad, this here was coming here, so this was 1 rad, right? So if this is 1 rad, does it make sense that our answer is 0.33? Yes, that's fine. And the other answer, if you type it on your calculator, you would get approximately 2.8. And if you remember also here, this is pi, and pi is 3.14. So does it make sense that we get 2.8? Yes. Now, when you think about the cosine, it's going to be a little bit different. Just a second, I'm just going to add my unit, right? 2.8 rad or 0.339 rad. Actually, I'm just looking at my answer, and I guess I should round to the same unit. So if I'm rounding to the nearest 10, I should write 0.3 here, 0.3 rad, and 2.8 rad. All right, so when you look at the cosine, then remember cosine is the x value. So if this is your trig circle, remember this is 1 here, so 1/3 is around here. So you have to figure out your first angle. Your first angle will be here, right? This is your first angle. And the other angle down here is really 2 pi minus this angle. So we have to go around and do 2 pi minus our angle. So when we split this in two solutions, our first solution is cos negative 1 of 1/3. And the second one is 2 pi minus cos negative 1 of 1/3. If you want to find the approximate solution, you take your calculator. Make sure your calculator is in rad. You should get 1.2. And for the second one, x is approximately equal to 5.1. The next thing we're going to do is make it more complex because these ones were simple equations. Now what happens if there's a, b, h, k, and all of that around? So practice that first, and then when you think you're okay with this, then move on to the next video. Have fun!